She thought he was perfect, until he revealed his hidden truth. The sun hung low over the village of Nyandala, casting long golden shadows over the red earth. The scent of roasting maize and the distant hum of children's laughter drifted through the air as the villagers prepared for the evening. At the heart of the village, near the towering baobab tree that had stood for generations, a young woman named Adana carried a clay pot on her head, her steps graceful and sure as she walked home from the river. Adana was known not just for her beauty, but for her kindness. She was the kind of woman who would pause to help an elder carry firewood or stop to comfort a crying child. At 21, she was the pride of her family, hardworking, respectful, and skilled in the ways of her people. But more than anything, she longed for love, the kind of love that the old women spoke of in their evening tales by the fireside. And then one day Cato arrived. No one knew exactly where he had come from. He appeared one morning, dressed in fine clothes, with a confident smile and eyes that held secrets. He claimed to be a traveler, a merchant who had seen the world beyond Nyandala, beyond the great river, beyond the lands where the sun burned the earth like fire. He spoke with a charm that made people lean in to listen, and he carried himself with the kind of presence that demanded attention. It didn't take long for Cato to notice Adana. From the moment he saw her at the village well, balancing her water pot with effortless grace, he was captivated. He was unlike the village men. He didn't just admire from afar or send his sisters to speak on his behalf. No, Cato spoke to her directly, his voice smooth like river stones. "You carry that pot as if it weighs nothing," he remarked one evening, stepping beside her. Adana turned, startled, but found herself smiling. "When you've been doing something your whole life, it becomes easy." He chuckled. "Maybe, but I believe some things are just meant to be effortless, like beauty and connection." His words made her heart flutter, though she told herself to be cautious. Men who spoke sweetly often carried sharp edges hidden beneath their smiles. Yet, as days turned to weeks, Cato proved himself to be different. He helped the elders with repairs on their huts, he played with the children, and he sat with the men at the evening gatherings, sharing stories of lands far away. Soon the whispers began. "He is a good man," the village women murmured approvingly. "He would make a fine husband for Adana," the elders nodded. And for the first time in her life, Adana felt hope bloom in her chest like the first rains after a long drought. Cato was everything she had prayed for, strong, kind, intelligent, and worldly. He treated her like she was precious, his attention unwavering, his words filled with promises of a future together. But something about him remained a mystery. He never spoke of his past in detail. When asked about his family, he would smile and say, "The road has been my home for so long, I have forgotten what it means to belong to one place." When pressed about where he was going next, he would change the subject with a clever joke. Adana's heart told her to trust him, but the whispers of doubt in her mind refused to be silenced. And then, one evening, under the silver glow of the full moon, Cato took her hand and said, "Marry me, Adana." It should have been the happiest moment of her life. But deep inside, something told her. She didn't truly know the man standing before her. The moon hung high above Nyandala, its silver light casting long shadows across the village. The evening air was thick with the scent of burning firewood, mingling with the distant hum of drums from a celebration at the chief's compound. Somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic croaking of frogs and the occasional hoot of an owl echoed through the night. Adana sat outside her family's hut, her heart pounding against her ribs. Cato's proposal lingered in the air like the soft embers of a dying fire, warming her thoughts yet filling them with unease. She had always imagined this moment, how the man she loved would kneel before her, promising her a life of happiness. And yet, something felt off. She turned to her grandmother, Mama Nia, the wisest woman in the village, who sat beside her weaving a basket with hands that had seen many seasons. Adana hesitated before speaking. "Cato has asked me to marry him." Mama Nia did not stop weaving. "And what does your heart say?" Adana exhaled, staring at the ground. "I don't know." Mama Nia nodded slowly, her aged face unreadable. "A man's charm is like the morning mist, beautiful, but it fades with the sun. What remains is who he truly is." Adana swallowed. She had heard the village rumors, whispers of how Cato had no past, no roots. He was like a river, always moving, never settling. And yet, he was loved by all. He had done nothing to suggest he was anything but a good man. Still, doubt gnawed at her. That night, she couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind restless. Finally, she decided she needed answers. The next morning, she sought out Omari, an elder known for his wisdom and knowledge of outsiders. She found him beneath the great baobab tree, where he often sat carving wooden figures. "Omari," she greeted respectfully. He looked up, his sharp eyes studying her. "Adana, you carry a question." She sat beside him, gathering her courage. "What do you know of Cato?" Omari ran his fingers over the smooth surface of his carving. "A charming young man. A hard worker. But he is a mystery." Adana's heart clenched. "Have you ever met someone like him before?" The old man hesitated, then sighed. "Many years ago, a traveler came through Nyandula. He was kind, generous, much like Cato. He won the trust of a family, married their daughter, and then disappeared." Adana's breath hitched. "Disappeared?" Omari nodded. "One night without a word. And when they searched, they found nothing. No footprints, no belongings. It was as if he had never existed." A chill ran down Adana's spine. She wanted to believe Cato was different. But what if he wasn't? That evening, she found him standing by the river, skipping stones across the water's surface. He smiled when he saw her. "You seem troubled." Adana hesitated, then faced him. "Why did you choose me?" Cato tilted his head. "Why does the sun choose to rise each morning? Some things just feel right." She swallowed. "And if I say yes, what happens next? Where will we live? What kind of life will we have?" He took her hand gently. "Wherever the wind takes us." The words should have sounded romantic. Instead, they felt like a warning. Adana realized then that she was standing at the edge of something unknown, staring into a future that both enticed and terrified her. And deep inside, she feared that if she stepped forward, she might never find her way back. The days following Cato's proposal were filled with excitement and whispers. The women of Nyandula smiled at Adana as she passed, some already discussing wedding preparations. Her mother, Mama Abani, beamed with pride, speaking of how blessed Adana was to have found such a strong and handsome suitor. But while everyone else celebrated, Adana's heart remained restless. She wanted to trust Cato. His presence felt warm, his laughter was infectious, and his words painted a future so beautiful it was hard to resist. But the warning from Omari the elder played in her mind like a haunting melody. The story of the man who had vanished, leaving no trace, made her wonder. Who was Cato before he came to Nyandula? What was he hiding? One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she decided to confront him. She found him near the river, sharpening his hunting knife against a smooth stone. The sound of metal against rock sent chills through her, but she pushed her fear aside. "Cato," she said softly. He looked up, smiling. "Adana, my beautiful flower." She hesitated before sitting beside him. "Tell me about your past." His smile faltered for the briefest moment. So brief that if she hadn't been watching closely, she might have missed it. "My past?" "Yes." She met his gaze. "Before you came to Nyandula." Cato chuckled, setting the knife down. "I have told you, my love. I am a traveler. The road has been my home." Adana pressed further. "But where is your family? Where were you born?" A shadow crossed his face, and for the first time, she saw something behind his charm. Something dark, something he was trying to keep buried. "My family is gone," he said, his voice quieter now. "Taken by war. That is why I do not speak of them." Adana's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." He exhaled, forcing a smile. "Let us not dwell on the past, my love. What matters is the future. Our future." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let it go. But something inside her refused to be silenced. The warning 2 nights later, while fetching water from the well, Adana overheard hushed voices. Hidden in the shadows near a cluster of huts, she recognized Omari speaking with another elder, Baba Tumbo. "I do not trust him," Baba Tumbo said. "A man with no past is a man with secrets." Omari sighed. "We must be careful. There is something unsettling about Cato." Adana's grip tightened around her water pot. They weren't the only ones who had doubts. The next morning, she sought out her best friend, Zubaida, who had always been the one person she could confide in. They walked through the fields, their feet brushing against the tall grass. "I need to know the truth, Zubaida," Adana whispered. "But how?" Zubaida bit her lip, deep in thought. Then her eyes lit up. "The diviner. She sees things others do not." Adana's stomach twisted. The village diviner, Mama Annika, was feared and respected. She was known for her visions, for whispering truths that many did not want to hear. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Adana made her way to Mama Annika's hut. The old woman sat before a small fire, her wrinkled hands tracing patterns in the dirt. She did not look up when Adana entered. "You seek answers," she murmured. Adana swallowed hard. "Yes." Mama Annika finally lifted her gaze, her old eyes piercing. "The man you love is not who he says he is." A cold shiver ran through Adana's spine. "What do you mean?" The fire crackled, and Mama Annika's voice dropped to a whisper. "He carries a shadow, a past he has buried. But the past does not stay buried forever." Adana's heart pounded. She had felt it, had sensed something was not right. But now, hearing it spoken aloud, the fear became real. She had to find out the truth, before it was too late. Adana left Mama Annika's hut with her heart pounding like the distant sound of war drums. The night air was thick and heavy, the distant croaking of frogs blending with the rustling of the wind through the trees. She clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, but no amount of warmth could silence the chill spreading through her bones. Cato had a past he was hiding, a shadow that refused to stay buried. But what was it? As she walked through the dimly lit village paths, her mind raced. Should she confront him? Should she tell her parents? A voice deep inside her warned her to be careful. If Cato was hiding something dangerous, exposing him too soon could put her, and everyone she loved, at risk. The suspicious stranger the next morning, an unfamiliar man, arrived in Nyandala. His clothes were travel-worn, and his face bore the exhaustion of a long journey. He was older, with sharp eyes that seemed to scan the village as if searching for something or someone. Adana noticed him speaking in hushed tones with Baba Tumbo near the market square. The elder's face grew serious as he listened, occasionally glancing around as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping. Curiosity burned inside her, and she carefully approached after the stranger left. "Baba Tumbo," she greeted, lowering her voice. "Who is that man?" The elder hesitated before answering. "A traveler from a neighboring village. He is searching for someone." Adana's breath hitched. "Who?" Baba Tumbo sighed deeply, his weathered face troubled. "A man who wronged his people. A man who fled into the night, leaving destruction in his wake." Her fingers curled into fists. She didn't need to ask, she already knew the answer. The man was looking for Cato. A dangerous secret that evening. Adana watched Cato closely as they sat together outside her family's hut. He seemed relaxed, smiling as he spoke of his dreams for their future. But now, every word felt like a carefully constructed lie. "Tell me," she said suddenly, interrupting him. "Have you ever done something you regret?" Cato paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. For the briefest moment, something flickered there, fear, hesitation. But then, just as quickly, it was gone. "We all have regrets, Adana," he said smoothly, reaching for her hand. "But what matters is who we choose to be now." Her stomach twisted. She could feel it now, the weight of the truth pressing against him like a dam ready to burst. Something was coming. And when it did, she knew everything would change. The village of Nyandala felt different now. What once felt warm and familiar now seemed cloaked in unease. Adana moved through the marketplace, her ears tuned to the hushed murmurs of the villagers. The stranger was still in the village, still asking questions. And though no one had said his name outright, Adana knew. He was searching for Cato. That night, she made a decision. She could no longer wait for the truth to reveal itself. She had to find it. The discovery of the moon was high when Adana crept toward the small hut where Cato stayed. She had never entered before. He always met her outside, always kept a distance between his private space and the rest of the village. Now, as she pushed open the wooden door, her pulse pounded in her ears. Inside, the room was sparse, just a mat, a few clay pots, and a bundle of cloth tucked into the corner. But something caught her eye. A small wooden chest pushed against the wall. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The lid creaked as she lifted it, revealing folded garments, a leather pouch, and a dagger. Not an ordinary one. The hilt was ornate, engraved with symbols she did not recognize. The blade, even in the dim light, glinted with something dark, stains that looked too deep to be rust. Her breath caught. And then, beneath the garments, she found a medallion. A round, heavy piece of metal with an emblem she had never seen before. It was old, worn from years of handling. But something about it felt important. She was still staring at it when a voice cut through the darkness. "What are you doing, Adana?" She gasped, spinning around to see Cato standing in the doorway. His eyes were unreadable, his expression carefully guarded. Her fingers clenched around the medallion. "Who are you, Cato?" A long silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice that sent chills through her, he said, "Not the man you think I am." The turning point. Adana's heart pounded. "Then tell me who you really are." Cato exhaled, stepping inside. He reached for the medallion in her hand, but she pulled back. He studied her for a long moment, then his expression hardened. I never meant for you to find this. Adana's stomach twisted. What did you do? For the first time since she had met him, the charming, confident man she had fallen for was gone. What stood before her now was a man with secrets too dark to stay buried. The past has caught up to me, he murmured, his gaze flickering toward the door. And now, Adana, you must decide if you still trust me. Her fingers curled around the medallion. Trust. She wasn't sure she even knew him anymore. Adana's pulse pounded in her ears as she stared at Cato, his face barely visible in the dim candlelight. The weight of the medallion in her hand felt heavier now, as if it carried the truth she had been searching for, a truth she was no longer sure she wanted to know. Cato took a slow step forward, his eyes locked onto hers. Adana, he said softly, his voice a whisper in the night. Give that to me. She clutched the medallion tighter, stepping back. Not until you tell me what it means. His jaw tensed, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing her, but something deeper, something darker. This doesn't concern you, he said, his voice firmer now. Adana's breath hitched. Doesn't concern me? Her voice trembled with anger. You asked me to marry you, Cato. You made me believe I knew you. And now I find, she gestured to the dagger, the strange symbols, the medallion clutched in her palm. I find this, and you tell me it doesn't concern me? A muscle twitched in his jaw. I never meant for you to get involved. She shook her head, frustration rising in her chest. But I am involved. And I won't take another step with you until you tell me the truth. Cato exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to be watching. When he looked back at her, his expression had changed. Gone was the charming, confident man she had loved. In his place was a man carrying a past too heavy to hide any longer. He took another step forward. This time, she didn't move away. You want the truth? His voice was low, steady. Then listen carefully. A past-revealed Cato looked down at the medallion in her hand and let out a slow breath. That belonged to my brother. Adana's grip loosened slightly. Your brother? He nodded. We were raised in a village far from here, near the Great Plains. My brother, Ikin, was a warrior. A leader. He fought for our people, protected them, but power changes men. Cato's voice darkened, his gaze distant. Ikin became ruthless. He no longer fought for our people, he fought for himself. He raided villages, took what he wanted, and left destruction behind. And when I tried to stop him, his eyes flickered to the dagger. He gave me this, told me that one day, I would need it to defend myself against him. Adana's chest tightened. What happened to him? Cato hesitated. Then, his next words sent a chill through her bones. I killed him. The room fell silent. The candle's flame flickered, casting eerie shadows on the hut walls. Adana felt her knees weaken. You killed your own brother? Cato's expression was unreadable. I had no choice. The air between them grew heavy, thick with the weight of the truth. Adana searched his face, looking for the man she had loved, the man she thought she had known. But all she saw now was a stranger. She swallowed hard. Why are they looking for you, Cato? His jaw tightened. Because not everyone believes my brother was a monster. Some believe I betrayed him. And now they want vengeance. Adana felt her heart racing. The stranger in the village, he wasn't just looking for Cato. He was hunting him. She took a shaky breath, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew had been shattered. And now, she had to decide. Would she run from Cato's past? Or would she stand beside him, knowing it might cost her everything? Adana's hands trembled as she clutched the medallion, her mind racing. Cato had killed his own brother. The weight of his confession hung between them, suffocating the space like thick smoke. Outside, the village was quiet, but Adana knew that silence would not last. The stranger, the man hunting Cato, was still here, still asking questions. She took a deep breath. If they find you, what will happen? Cato's gaze was steady, but the tension in his body betrayed his fear. They will not ask questions. They will not care about my reasons. They will demand blood. Adana's heart pounded. She had spent weeks dreaming of a future with Cato, of a life built on love and trust. But now, that future seemed like a distant illusion. You should have told me, she whispered. He exhaled sharply. I didn't want this life for you. She clenched her fists. But it is my life now. You asked me to marry you, Cato. You made me believe we could build something together. His face softened, but there was sorrow in his eyes. That was before my past caught up to me. A sudden noise outside made them both freeze, a voice low and urgent. The stranger. He was close. Cato grabbed Adana's hand. We have to go. Now. She pulled back. Go where? We can't just run forever. I have a plan, he said. But we have to leave before it's too late. Adana looked at him, searching his face. The boyish charm she had fallen for was gone, replaced by a man carrying a burden too heavy for one person. Did she trust him? The sound of footsteps grew louder. There was no more time to decide. Adana took a shaky breath. Then, in one swift motion, she placed the medallion in Cato's palm. Then let's go. Cato's fingers curled around it, his expression unreadable. But there was something else in his eyes now, something she hadn't seen before. Hope. Hand in hand, they slipped into the darkness. Adana's feet pounded against the earth as she and Cato moved swiftly through the narrow village paths, their hands clasped tightly. The moon hung high, casting silver light over the trees that lined the outskirts of Nyandula. Behind them, voices murmured in the distance. The stranger and the men he had brought were searching. Cato led her toward the river, where the sound of rushing water drowned out their footsteps. He stopped beneath a thick canopy of trees, pulling her close. We can't stay here, he whispered. They will find us. Adana's chest heaved as she tried to steady her breathing. Where will we go? Cato hesitated. There is a village beyond the hills. It is far, but I know someone there, an elder who helped me once before. He can protect us. Adana's heart twisted. Leaving meant never returning. It meant abandoning her family, her home, the life she had always known. She had dreamed of building a future with Cato, but not like this, not in exile, running from ghosts of the past. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. What if I don't leave? Cato's grip on her tightened. They will use you to get to me. And if that happens, Adana, his voice broke. I can't lose you. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes, but she forced them back. This wasn't how love was supposed to be. She thought of her parents, of Mama Annika's warnings, of the village elders who had always taught that the past could not be outrun. Cato had tried to bury his past, but it had followed him like a shadow. And now it had become hers too. A hard decision, the sound of footsteps snapping twigs, made them both stiffen. Cato reached for the dagger at his waist, his jaw clenched. Adana turned toward the source of the noise, her pulse thundering. A lone figure emerged from the darkness. The stranger. His eyes locked onto Cato. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but Adana could see the hardened expression of a man who had come for justice, or vengeance. Cato, the man said, his voice steady. You cannot run forever. Cato stepped forward, placing himself between Adana and the stranger. I never wanted to run, he said. I only wanted a life free from the past. The man scoffed. A man who spills his own brother's blood cannot escape that easily. Adana's breath hitched. This was it, the moment where everything would be decided. She looked at Cato, then at the stranger. There had to be another way. Swallowing her fear, she stepped forward. Enough, she said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. I don't know who you are, or what revenge you seek, but I know Cato. I know he regrets what happened. He isn't the monster you think he is. The stranger's gaze flickered to her, his expression unreadable. And who are you? I am someone who believes in the man he is now, not the man he was then. A tense silence filled the air. Then, slowly, the stranger exhaled. I do not come to kill him, he said at last. But there are people who demand justice. If Cato is willing to face them, perhaps there is a way to end this without more bloodshed. Cato stiffened. You want me to stand trial? The man nodded. Face your people, speak your truth. Let them decide. Adana turned to Cato, her heart aching. Running had never been the answer. But was he willing to risk his life for redemption? Cato met her gaze, searching for something, perhaps courage, perhaps hope. Then slowly he nodded. I will go. Adana reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. Then I will go with you. The stranger studied them for a moment before nodding. Then we leave at dawn. As the night stretched on, Adana knew that their journey was far from over. But for the first time, she wasn't running. She was walking toward the truth, no matter where it led. The journey back to Cato's homeland was long and tense. Adana walked beside him, their hands sometimes brushing but never fully clasping. The weight of what lay ahead hung over them like a storm cloud. When they arrived, the village was waiting. The elders stood in a line, their faces carved with wisdom and judgment. Villagers gathered, whispering as Cato stepped forward. This was the moment of reckoning. The man who had found them, Ikin's closest friend, Masao, spoke first. Cato has returned to face justice. His voice carried over the crowd, firm but not unkind. Let the truth be spoken. Cato took a deep breath. His voice did not waver. I took my brother's life. A murmur rippled through the crowd. But I did not do it in malice. Ikin had become a man of violence. He raided, stole, and destroyed lives. I tried to stop him, but he left me no choice. Silence followed. Then an elder stepped forward, her gaze piercing. And have you carried this burden with honor, Cato? Cato met her eyes. I have carried it with sorrow. The elders spoke in hushed tones before turning back to him. You will not be punished with death, the elder said at last. But a life taken is never forgotten. You must stay and serve this village, rebuild what was lost, and live in the shadow of your actions. Adana let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cato nodded solemnly. I accept. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Adana turned to Cato. What happens now? He looked at her, eyes filled with something new, peace. I stay, he said. And I make things right. Adana's heart clenched. And me? Cato brushed his fingers against hers, a soft, fleeting touch. That is your choice, Adana. She looked around. The village was not hers, the past was not hers. But Cato, he was still hers. She took his hand. Then I stay too. Cato's smile was small but real. And as they stood there, beneath the setting sun, Adana knew that love was not about perfection. It was about choosing someone despite their past, despite their scars. And she chose him.